Well, Palestinians living alongside hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem say that increasing violence has left them worried for their lives and futures. The United Nations says that violent settler attacks on Palestinians have increased since the Hamas terror attacks of October 7th and the war in Gaza. And locals say international sanctions against some settlers are not helping them. DW's Tanya Kramer reports.
Violent Israeli settlers make their way to the village of Asawiya in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, scenes that Anan Ahmed knows all too well. It happened again some weeks ago.
Settlers came down the mountain from the settlement, frightening the children. We have small children at home. They throw stones. This last time, they injured 2 people. My wife's brother was shot at twice, here and here. The situation is difficult.
Palestinian villages as Asawiya are almost surrounded by Israeli settlements, considered illegal under international law. Violent settlers throw stones, destroy crops and olive trees, burn cars and property, and it has increased in recent months.
We live on our land. This is my father's and grandfather's house. There's no safety. There are children, small children. This is forbidden. They come and destroy everything. Why? They cause the problems. There is no security, ever.
The violence recently turned deadly when a Palestinian volunteer paramedic was shot and killed while treating people injured by Israeli settlers. His colleague Bashar Kayuti was at the scene. He tells us several shots hit their ambulance. Mohammed Musa was driving it when he was hit and killed.
We live through a difficult nightmare, facing tremendous suffering, but we are steadfast. We have seen many martyrs, many injuries, but what we faced with the targeting of our colleagues was the most difficult in our years as medics.
The question of whether a settler or a soldier fired the fatal shot remains unclear. The Israeli military said in a statement at the time that they and the border police were called to disperse a riot. During the incident, an ambulance driver for the Palestinian Red Crescent was killed. The military police have opened an investigation, and a command review into the circumstances of the incident is underway. Bashar says Palestinians feel they simply have no protection here. The military is often seen standing by or even accompanying settlers during intimidating and violent attacks. And Palestinian security forces are only allowed to operate in limited areas. He says international sanctions, which have been imposed on some settlers, have not helped.
The sanctions imposed by the US on those criminal settlers don't change much in reality. Settlers continue to attack, burn and destroy homes and act violently towards the Palestinians. In reality, these steps have had no effect.
Back in Asawiya, Anan Ahmed says he fears most for his children, who are growing up in this atmosphere of violence.
And we can now talk to Shuki Friedman about this. He's vice president of the Jewish People Policy Institute and a senior lecturer in law at the Peres Academic Center. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Friedman, how do you explain the dramatic increase in settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank?
First of all, the increase of events and violence is definitely concerning. Me personally is a lawyer in Israel and a citizen of Israel, but also it's concern regarding international arena and our ability to enforce law within the West Bank. And therefore, there is definitely a necessity and crucial necessity from the side of the government and their authorities to become more determined and more aggressive in enforcing the law in the West Bank. But we have to try to understand the reality and differentiate between false reports and increase on violence. There are more events, and this event should be taken care seriously and should be investigated and prosecuted based on Israeli law. We are trying to be loyal to our laws, international law, also in the West Bank. But there's some false reporting, and then for the increase in the statistics of the increase in violence is not precise always.
Okay. Additional investigations, both journalistic and I suppose by the authorities, would be useful. But last month, the U.S. and the EU already had conducted their assessments, and they imposed sanctions on some settler extremists and associated groups. What impact, let me ask you about that, what impact are these sanctions likely to have?
First of all, it was the first time that the U.S. sanctioned the West Bank settlers and the West Bank entities, and be followed by other countries, also the EU. And this is definitely a red light for the Israeli government, signing the authorities here in Israel to be much more determined in enforcing the law in the West Bank. And these sanctions have a crucial and might be dramatic influence on the settlers in the West Bank and their ability to continue their daily life, because we have to realize that sanctions like this work as a net through the financial institutions and might, in a way, harass or prevent financial activities, not only of the settlers that have been sanctioned by the US and the EU, but also by others that are working or acting from the West Bank financially. And therefore, it has an financial implication and also political implication on Israel in the West Bank.
Okay, so that the sanctions will affect some of the settlers and the organizations that they've been imposed on, but do you think it's going to lead to a reduction in violence? We heard someone in our report there, Palestinians, saying that so far those sanctions haven't helped.
You know, the major aim, I think, target of these sanctions by the US is to force the Israeli government to work more determinedly against these settlers. I don't think the settlers themselves would have any impact or reduce their violence. I think that the role is on the government and on the ideas that's working in the West Bank, the police working in the West Bank, to try to protect Palestinians from this violence and protect Israel from Palestinian violence. We want the West Bank, as far as we are still over there, calm and secure to all people that live there. And if there are settlers that are breaching the law and acting violently, it's the role of the Israeli government to enforce the law over there. And sanctions should motivate not only the settlers, but mainly the government to be more serious about it.
What do you think has to happen next? And to what degree is this connected to what's happening in Gaza? How do you see this going forward? Very briefly, if you can.
Yeah, so far, West Bank is more calm than expected. We in Israel expected that due to the 7th of October massacre of Hamas and the war in Gaza, there will be more unrest and violent activities from the side of Palestinians and from the other side in the West Bank. And so far, the Israeli IDF is successfully containing this potential violence, but we have to look to the long term and to think how we contain and how we manage to able to have a mutual life in the West Bank to the extent we are still controlling this territory.
Dr. Shuki Friedman with the Jewish People Policy Institute, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you very much. Good day.